When you wake up in the morning and your mind feels clear enough to remember a promise you made 40 years ago, when your body may be slower, but your sense of who you are still feels steady, that's not luck, that's something deeper. Most people think aging is measured by wrinkles, gray hair, or how fast you can walk across a room. But the people who have lived the longest and lived well quietly know something different. Aging well has very little to do with looking young, and everything to do with what you can still do inside and out. If you're between the ages of 65 and 85, and you still recognize yourself in these abilities we're about to talk about, you're doing better than most people your age, and honestly better than many people half your age. This is young vs old, where young questions meet old wisdom, where mistakes are spoken out loud, regrets are examined honestly, and life lessons aren't sugar-coated or rushed, just real stories, real people, real time. Today's story isn't about fear of getting older. It's about noticing what still works, what still matters, and what quietly proves that time hasn't taken everything from you. Because here's the truth most people don't say out loud. Many people grow old, but very few grow deep. And depth shows up in abilities no doctor's tests can fully measure. When younger people ask elders, "What's the biggest mistake you made?" the answers are rarely dramatic. They don't say, "I should have worked harder." They don't say, "I should have been more impressive." They say things like, "I didn't listen when I should have. I held on to anger too long. I thought I had more time." Aging better than most doesn't mean you avoided mistakes. It means you learned from them and didn't let them harden you. Let's start with the first quiet ability, one that almost no one talks about, but everyone feels when it's gone, the ability to sit with yourself without needing noise. If you can sit in a quiet room, no phone, no television, no distraction, and not feel restless or afraid of your own thoughts, that's rare. Especially today, many people, young and old, are terrified of silence because silence forces reflection, and reflection brings up regret, old memories, and questions we never answered. But elders who age well, they've made peace with silence. One man, 78 years old, once said something that stayed with me. He said, "When I was young, silence felt like failure. Now it feels like rest." That shift doesn't happen automatically with age. It happens when someone has faced their mistakes honestly, forgiven themselves, and stopped running from their own story. If you still have this ability to be alone with your thoughts and not feel empty, that's a sign of emotional strength most people never develop. The second ability is even harder to admit, especially in a culture that worships being right. It's the ability to say, "I was wrong." Older adults who age better than most aren't the loudest in the room. They don't argue to win. They don't interrupt just to prove a point. They listen. And when they realize they've misunderstood something, they adjust. That kind of humility doesn't come from weakness. It comes from a long history of being wrong, surviving it, and learning that ego is expensive. Young people often believe being wrong means losing respect. Old wisdom knows being wrong is how respect is earned. If you can still learn from younger people, still let young questions challenge your old answers, you're aging better than most. Because stubbornness feels like strength, but it's usually fear wearing armor. Another quiet ability, emotional regulation. That means you don't react the way you used to. Not because you're numb, but because you've learned what's worth your energy. You've yelled before, you've fought before, you've been consumed by anger before, and you realized something important. Most battles don't change the outcome, they just steal your peace. If you can pause before reacting, if you can let small things pass without carrying them for days, that's not aging out of emotion, that's aging into wisdom. Many younger people confuse emotional control with suppression, but elders who age well feel deeply. They just don't let every feeling drive the car. Now let's talk about memory, not the kind doctors test. I'm talking about meaningful memory. You may forget names, you may forget dates, you may walk into a room and forget why. But if you still remember why certain moments mattered, if you still remember the lesson behind the pain, if you remember the faces that shaped you, you're aging better than most. One woman in her early 80s said, "I don't remember every year of my life, but I remember the years that taught me something." That's not loss. That's prioritization. Life eventually strips away trivia and leaves you with truth. And finally, one of the most overlooked abilities of all, the ability to care without controlling. Aging poorly often looks like bitterness, judgment, and constant comparison. Aging well looks like concern mixed with acceptance. You worry about your children, but you don't live their life for them. You give advice, but you don't force it. You share old wisdom, but you let young people make their own mistakes. That balance is hard. It requires trust, and trust only comes after you've accepted that you cannot fix everything, and that's okay. If you still care deeply but don't need to control outcomes, you're aging better than most. These abilities don't show up on birthday candles. They don't come from avoiding regret, but from facing it. They don't belong only to the old, but they're earned through time. In the next part, we'll slow down even more and look at real moments where these abilities quietly changed lives, small decisions, everyday conversations, and the mistakes that shaped them. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, take a breath. You're doing better than you think. If you've made it this far, slow down for a moment. Because part 2 isn't about listing abilities, it's about watching them show up in real life, in small, ordinary moments that don't look impressive, but quietly reveal who is aging well and who is still fighting time. There's a story an 82-year-old man once shared when a young neighbor asked him a simple question. The neighbor was frustrated, overwhelmed, angry at his job, his family, his own mistakes. He asked, "How did you survive all these years without becoming bitter?" The old man didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands that had built things, broken things, held people, and buried people. Then he said, "I didn't survive without bitterness. I just learned when to put it down." That sentence carries more life lessons than most books. Aging better than most doesn't mean you avoided disappointment. It means you didn't let disappointment become your personality. Many people carry regret like proof of experience. They repeat old stories not to heal, but to stay angry. They relive mistakes instead of learning from them. But elders who age well, they remember without reopening the wound every time. One woman, 76, talked about her marriage. She said, "Why both failed each other in different ways. For a long time, I needed to decide who was more wrong. Now I just understand who we were." That's perspective, and perspective is an ability. Young people often want clear villains and heroes. Old wisdom knows life is messier than that. If you can look back without rewriting history, without pretending you were perfect, without needing someone else to carry all the blame, you're aging better than most. Another quiet moment where aging well reveals itself is how someone responds to change. Technology changes. Language changes. Social rules shift. The world younger generations grow up in doesn't resemble the one elders knew. Some people react with fear. Some react with judgment. Some shut down and say, "That's not how it used to be." But the ones aging better than most respond with curiosity. They ask questions. They listen more than they lecture. They don't confuse unfamiliar with wrong. A 69-year-old grandmother once said, "I don't understand everything my grandchildren care about, but I understand what it feels like to want to be understood." That's old wisdom meeting young questions, and it matters more than being up to date. There's also something deeply revealing in how someone talks about their past mistakes. People aging poorly often speak with bitterness or denial. People aging well speak with clarity and humility. They say things like, "I didn't know then what I know now." They don't say, "I had no choice," because aging well includes taking responsibility without self-hatred. One man in his early 80s said, "I regret the years I was emotionally unavailable." But regret doesn't mean punishment, it means awareness. That's an ability many never reach at any age. To acknowledge regret, extract the lesson, and not lives stuck in shame. Let's talk about listening, real listening. As people age, many stop listening and start waiting to talk. They interrupt, they repeat themselves, they give advice no one asked for. But elders aging better than most do something different. They listen with patience, not because they agree, but because they respect experience unfolding in real time. They remember what it felt like to be young, uncertain, and convinced they were right. One older teacher once said, "I don't correct young people immediately anymore. Life will do that better than I ever could." That restraint is wisdom earned the hard way. Another place this shows up is forgiveness, not dramatic forgiveness, not public apologies, quiet forgiveness, the kind where you stop rehearsing old arguments, the kind where you no longer need closure from people who never changed, the kind where you accept that some relationships ended without resolution. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing peace over being right. Again and again, people who age better than most forgive themselves too. They stop punishing themselves for not knowing earlier. They stop comparing their timeline to someone else's. They stop asking what if every night. They understand something painful but freeing. You can't live life forward with a mind that lives backward. And finally, there's the way elders aging well talk about time. They don't rush conversations. They don't panic about productivity. They don't fill every moment with urgency. They understand time isn't something to defeat, it's something to respect. A 74-year-old woman said, "When I was young, I chased time. Now I walk with it." That's not resignation, that's alignment. These moments don't go viral. They don't look dramatic, but they shape families, friendships, and generations. In the next part, we'll talk about the cost of ignoring these abilities and what happens when people age without reflection, without humility, without learning from their own mistakes. If you're still listening, take another breath. You've lived long enough to recognize truth when you hear it. There's something uncomfortable we need to talk about now, because aging well isn't automatic. Time passes for everyone, but wisdom doesn't. Some people reach their 70s and 80s having lived many years, but never truly reflected on them. And the difference between those who age well and those who don't becomes painfully clear, not in big moments, but in daily life. You can hear it in how they speak. People who didn't age well often repeat the same complaints they had decades ago. Same arguments, same blame, same unresolved anger, just told with older voices. They say things like, "People don't respect me anymore. The world has gone downhill." Kids today are all the same, but listen closely and you'll notice something missing: ownership. Aging poorly often means never questioning your own role in how life turned out. Mistakes are always someone else's fault. Regret turns into resentment. Advice turns into control. And the cost of that shows up everywhere. Families feel it first. Children stop calling, not out of cruelty, but exhaustion. Every conversation becomes a lecture. Every update becomes an opportunity for judgment. Grandchildren learn quickly who listens and who only waits to talk. This is one of the hardest truths elders ever admit, often too late. Wisdom that feels like criticism stops being wisdom. Aging better than most requires a painful skill: self-examination, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, asking yourself questions like, why does this still make me angry? What am I afraid of losing? Who did I need to be right instead of kind with? Most people avoid these questions their entire lives. They stay busy, they stay distracted, They tell themselves they'll think about it later, but later comes, and if you never practice reflection, silence becomes unbearable. One man, 81, said something heartbreaking. He said, "I kept waiting for life to slow down so I could think. Now it's slow and I don't like what comes up." That's the cost of never learning to sit with yourself. Another place aging poorly reveals itself is rigidity, the refusal to adapt, the insistence that this is how it's always been, the belief that learning stops at a certain age. But life doesn't stop changing just because you're tired of changing with it. People aging well don't need to understand everything, but they stay open. They don't mock what they don't understand. They don't dismiss younger generations' struggles as weakness. They remember what it felt like to feel lost. Aging poorly, on the other hand, often looks like fear pretending to be certainty. Certainty about politics, certainty about morality, certainty about how others should live. But certainty without curiosity hardens into isolation. There's also the way people relate to their own past. Some elders relive their best years over and over, not with gratitude, but with longing. They talk about back then, as if life ended somewhere in the middle. Others speak of their past as something they survived, learned from, and integrated. Aging better than most doesn't mean clinging to youth. It means letting each stage of life belong to itself. One woman in her late 70s said, "I don't want to be 30 again. I was anxious all the time. I like knowing who I am now." That's acceptance, not surrender. Another difficult truth, aging poorly often comes from unprocessed grief. Loss accumulates with age. Parents, partners, friends, versions of yourself. If grief is never faced, it turns into irritability, bitterness, or emotional numbness. People aging will allow themselves to mourn fully. They cry, they talk, they remember. They don't rush healing or pretend they're fine. They'd understand that grief isn't weakness, it's love with nowhere to go. And perhaps the most telling difference of all, how someone treats people they no longer need. Service workers, neighbors, strangers, younger people with nothing to offer them. Aging poorly often brings entitlement. Aging well brings humility. An elder who still says, "Thank you," who still apologizes when wrong, who still sees people, not roles, carries a quiet dignity that never fades. Here's the part most people don't want to hear. If you're 65 to 85 and you recognize some of these harder truths, that doesn't mean you failed. It means you're still alive enough to reflect. Wisdom isn't about having lived perfectly. It's about being willing to look honestly even now. In the next part, we'll shift gently toward what can still be practiced, strengthened, and chosen regardless of age. Because aging better than most isn't about the years behind you. It's about what you do with the years you still have. If you're still here, this part is not about judgment, it's about choice. Because no matter how old you are, as long as you're breathing, some things can still be practiced, some abilities can still be strengthened, some habits can still be softened. Aging better than most isn't a title you earn once. It's something you choose quietly over and over. Let's talk about what that looks like in real life, not theory, not slogans. The first practice is deliberate reflection, not constant self-analysis, not regret spirals, just honest reflection. That might look like sitting with a cup of tea and asking yourself one question a day: what did I learn from today? No need for a big answer. Sometimes the lesson is simply, I need more rest, or I was too harsh, or that moment mattered more than I realized. People aging better than most don't rush past experiences. They let them settle. They understand that reflection turns memory into wisdom. The second practice is emotional honesty, not oversharing, not dramatizing, just telling the truth first to yourself. If you're lonely, admit it. If you're afraid, name it. If you're grieving, let it exist. Many elders were taught to stay strong by staying silent. But silence doesn't erase emotion, it buries it, and buried feelings don't disappear, they leak. Emotional honesty doesn't make you weak. It keeps you human. The third practice is staying teachable. This is where old wisdom and young questions meet. You don't have to agree with everything younger people believe. You don't have to understand every change. But staying teachable means staying curious. It means asking, why does this matter to you? Instead of saying, that's stupid. Teachable elders don't lose authority, they gain trust, because people don't need perfection from you. They need presence. The fourth practice is forgiveness, especially toward yourself. This is where many people get stuck. They replay mistakes from decades ago as if they happened yesterday. They punish themselves for choices made with limited information, limited support, limited maturity. Forgiveness doesn't change the past. It releases the present. One elder said, I kept waiting to feel forgiven. Then I realized I was the one holding the sentence. That realization alone can change the rest of your life. The fifth practice is contribution, not productivity. Aging better than most doesn't mean staying busy. It means staying useful in a way that fits who you are now. That might be listening. That might be mentoring. That might be showing up consistently for one person. You don't have to prove your worth. You just have to share it. There's also the practice of slowing down without checking out, choosing depth over speed, presence over noise. People aging well don't try to keep up with everything. They choose what matters. They understand that attention is one of the last things you truly own. Another quiet but powerful practice, gratitude without comparison. Not I'm lucky compared to others, just this mattered to me. A conversation, a morning without pain, a memory that still warms you. Gratitude isn't denial, it's recognition. And finally, acceptance, not giving up, not settling. Acceptance of what is without bitterness, of what can still be changed without panic, of what cannot without resentment. Aging better than most doesn't mean liking everything about getting older. It means making peace with reality and still choosing meaning. These practices don't require perfect health. They don't require wealth. They don't require applause. They require willingness. In the final part, we'll bring everything together, not with big promises, but with a simple invitation. Because if you've lived long enough to hear this, you've lived long enough to matter. Before this ends, let's sit here for a moment. Not to rush forward, not to summarize life into neat lessons, just to notice what stayed with you if you're between 65 and 85, and you recognized yourself in even a few of these abilities, the quiet ones, the unseen ones. That's not something small. It means time hasn't just passed through you, it's shaped you. Aging better than most doesn't mean your life was easier. It means you learned how to carry what was heavy. You learned when to hold on, when to let go, and when to simply sit with what couldn't be fixed. That is not weakness. That is earned strength. To the younger listeners, the ones with questions, impatience, and plans, listen closely. Old wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't chase attention. It waits. It waits in the way someone listens without interrupting, in the way they admit regret without shame, in the way they offer advice and let you ignore it. Mistakes are not a failure of youth. They are the raw material of wisdom, but only if you're willing to reflect instead of defend.